Here, it's pretty cheap. It's always something very interesting. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McMullen, Tom McMullen. He's going to introduce our guest and enjoy.
Dean Foss is a geologist that I've known for years. I don't remember exactly how many. When somebody asks me about a date or a period of time, I kind of lose track of years and years. It's been a long time, Dean. He grew up in Vermont and did his undergraduate studies at Williams College in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Then he decided to concentrate on geology and went to Texas A&M, got his master's in geology at Texas A&M. And I assume he pretty much stayed in Texas from then on. Dean is known as a prospect generator. He's not only a geologist. To generate prospects, and to find oil, you really have to understand drilling engineering, reservoir engineering, seismic interpretations. You have to be an amateur or a working geophysicist, maybe not by trade, but by training. You have to know the business world, how to put contracts together, how to make deals, and then you got to go out and sell it. So you got to be a salesman. And Dean is all of those things. And he also says he's lucky. You have to have luck in the oil business, and I say you have to be an optimist to be an oil man and a prospect generator and a salesman. Actually, Dean just made a discovery in Connecticut, right across the Escambia line in Barnett's Crossroads community. There was a field there, it's been there for years. Nobody paid it much attention. Dean really focused in on it and has proven up something that's maybe even bigger than the field itself. It was a different way of looking at things. So without any further ado, Dean, tell us your story.
Thank you, Tom. I have been working in Southwest Alabama for probably close to 20 years. And as Tom mentioned just a minute ago, before that discovery, I had drilled a bunch of dry holes, was not discouraged, was still optimistic, drilled this most recent well, and it seems to be a very, very good well. And I just wanted to tell you, I don't know what it is about this place, but I keep coming back here. I enjoy working here, and I very much enjoy the opportunity to make this presentation today. Let me be clear about something. I was myself, or my company, was not involved in the discovery of either Little Cedar Creek or Brooklyn. About a year ago, I was approached by a professional organization in Houston to make a presentation at their lunch gatherings, monthly lunch gatherings, much like this. And eventually I decided to put together a presentation on Little Cedar Creek in Brooklyn, not the geology, more of the history. Who was involved, at what time, who missed out, who got lucky, who didn't get lucky, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew to do this properly, I needed contributions from a lot of people who were involved in the discovery and the development of Little Cedar Creek in Brooklyn. So I sought those people out. Both of these fields, one was found in 1994, that's Little Cedar Creek. Brooklyn officially was found in 2009. So both of them are relatively recent. So the people who were involved in discovering these fields are, for the most part, still alive, with a couple of exceptions. So I sought those people out, and they made contributions, anecdotes, information, very useful information, original maps that they used to sell their deals that resulted in the discoveries, et cetera, et cetera. So I put the talk together. About a year ago, again, I bumped into Robin Smith, who worked for Midrock, who some of you may know. Robin worked for Jim Harris at Midrock for years and years and years. And Robin contributed some of the things you're going to see here and gave his blessing for me to put together this talk and make the presentation. So this was not just my effort, this was a group effort, and I just want to be clear that a lot of other people are responsible for it. I'm just telling the story. Okay, next, thank you. So here is a list of some of the people who are responsible for me being able to give this talk today. And if you notice, one of the people on the list is the guy who just talked to me, just talked about me. That guy right there. Some of you may know Steve Kraft for a while. He was actually a resident
Yes.
of Bruton. Some of these other names may be familiar as well. They were all involved in helping me put together this presentation. And as I said before, this is a great story, and hopefully I won't blow it. Thank you. So we really don't need an index map to tell you where you are. But just because everybody starts off a talk with an index map, I'm going to talk a little bit about this discovery, which was in 1970, Jay Field, because it sort of predated and previewed Little Cedar Creek in Brooklyn. Thank you. All right, so Brooklyn and Little Cedar Creek actually have a footprint that covers approximately 90 square miles. It's like a small county. So you wonder, how come it took so long to figure this out? How come it took so long for it to be found? How come so many people missed it? Well, I'm going to attempt to talk to you a little bit about that. But now we know where it is. It covers a large area. This is the location of Brooklyn. Is the younger field. It's on the south side. The boundary that you can see right here is the boundary of Brooklyn Field, and this is the northern field, Little Cedar Creek. And I'll be showing you those boundaries on numerous maps in future slides. Thank you. All right, just a couple of comments about how significant these fields really are. The combined production is, as of year-end 2024, was about 55 million barrels of oil and just under 100 BCF of gas. At that time, the field was producing about 164,000 barrels of oil. About 2/3 of that was coming out of Brooklyn. About 1/3 was coming out of Little Cedar Creek. The average per well production, just black oil, forget the gas, black oil production per well is about 300,000 barrels per well. That's very profitable type return on investment. Conservatively, I think this well, or this field, is probably going to make 88 million barrels of oil and oil equivalent. It's possible, depending on how the secondary recovery water floods work, this field could make 100 million barrels. If it does make 100 million barrels, that's a domestic giant oil field right here in southwest Alabama. Those are not easy to find. Thank you. All right, so here's an outline I'm going to show several times in the talk. Again, this is the outline of Brooklyn Field here. This is the outline of Little Cedar Creek Field up here. This black outline is an outline, a gross outline of the two fields, and in pale and bright yellow shows the holdings of Cedar Creek Land and Timber. Behind every major discovery, there's not only a geology story, but there's almost always a land story. And the bulk of this land story is about Cedar Creek Land and Timber and the deals that got done that resulted in the wells that got drilled and the production that got produced. By my count, this is not necessarily an official count, but there are 186 wells in Little Cedar Creek in Brooklyn, 86 wells in Little Cedar Creek, 100 wells in Brooklyn, and about 45% of those wells involve Cedar Creek Land and Timber lands, either partial or full interest. And one of the beauties of having a major landowner who not only owned the minerals but also owned the surface is that it was basically one-stop shopping. When you did a deal with CCLT, you got a lease, you got your surface damages, and you got access to the land because they had the minerals and they had the surface. And it expedited significantly the development and the drilling of this major field. Thank you. It's weird when you're talking to Paul Owens about Paul Owens. All right, so let's back up just for a minute here, and let's talk about Jay Field, because that, as far as the Smackover is concerned, is where it all started. It is by far and away the biggest Smackover field. It's produced over 600 million barrels of oil and oil equivalent to date. It was found in 1970 by Humble and LL&E, the #1 St. Regis well. And because it was such a significant field, major oil companies fanned out all over southwest Louisiana, Mississippi, East Texas, looking for additional Jay fields. Unfortunately, they did not find any, but they found several smaller fields along the way. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those smaller fields. They weren't big enough to keep the big companies interested. The big companies left, and smaller companies moved in. I'll talk a little bit about the seismic that Shell shot in southwest Alabama before they left. And then I'll talk a little bit about the rise of the independents, the Amarada Hesses, the Coastals, the Smackos, et cetera, who came in and filled the void left by the major companies when they pulled out. Sir?
What's the Smackover? Where does that come from, or what is?
So the Smackover is a Jurassic carbonate. It's roughly 150 million years old. The term Smackover comes from the town of Smackover, Arkansas. So Phillips Oil Company drilled a well. It actually didn't produce from the Smackover, but they penetrated the Smackover. They penetrated a yet unnamed Jurassic carbonate, and they decided after drilling the well and looking at the log and looking at the core that Jurassic carbonate was worthy of a name. Since they were just outside the town of Smackover, Arkansas, they called it the Smackover Formation. Sure. Thank you. So this is Jay Field. Part of it's in Alabama. Most of it, as you know, is in Florida. And the significant thing about Jay Field is at the very north end, it's a big anticline, a big structure, except at the very north end, there's a permeability barrier caused by change from porous rock to non-porous rock, and that's mostly responsible for why the oil's there at Jay Field. And because that stratigraphic component in terms of the trap is present at Jay Field, it has spurred geologists for the next 65 years and counting to look for stratigraphic traps in southwest Alabama, and until Brooklyn and Little Cedar Creek, they were unsuccessful until Little Cedar Creek and Brooklyn. Next slide. All right, so Jay Field is found down here on the state line, right here in 1970. Exxon publishes this article, this picture of southwest Alabama and the Panhandle of Florida in 1976. And they were remarkably close to figuring the whole thing out in 1976. Just really good science. In fact, they recognized what today geologists call the Upper Conecuh Embayment, which is right there where the green are the future location of Little Cedar Creek Field. The green triangle is the future location of a Hunt well that was drilled in 1994, which is actually the discovery well for Little Cedar Creek. And the other well I want to point out is this blue circle, which is an LL&E Ellis well that was drilled in 1971. Again, LL&E was one of the companies that was responsible for the discovery of Jay. They came 20 miles north, basically right to the border between Conecuh and Escambia County, and drilled that well where the blue dot is. It's a dry hole, but its mud log is shown over here on the right. Again, this well was drilled in 1971. If you were to lay this mud log on a producing well from Little Cedar Creek today, it would be virtually identical. They found 2 feet the pay section, the upper Smackover Oolite, the lower Smackover Reef, which are the two big producing zones at Little Cedar Creek. They found those two zones roughly 5 miles down dip from the future location. They were that close. They had shows, they had oil in the upper zone, in the Oolite zone, and they didn't follow up on it. They just drilled it, it was a dry hole, went away. 23 years later, Hunt comes along, finds the field, and then 10 years after that, we'll talk a little bit about the development of the field. Thank you. All right, this is work by Shell. Major oil companies do great work, but a lot of times they don't follow through. They'll do studies, they'll shoot seismic, they'll lease land, they'll drill a couple of dry holes, get tired, figure they have a better chance in the North Sea or offshore Brazil or something like that, and they'll leave. And they'll leave very quickly. They're there one day and they're gone the next. So this is an example of Shell. Shell did an incredible piece of work on the geology. This was done out of their New Orleans office in the 1980s. Again, they had this upper Conecuh embayment recognized. The green, again, on both these maps is the future location of Little Cedar Creek in Brooklyn. But they had the embayment, which is key to figuring out where the fields are. They actually had studies from cores and whatnot. They had identified the key rocks that were going to be the future reservoirs, the lower Smackover Oolite and the lower Smackover Reef and the upper Smackover Oolite, which were the future reservoirs at Little Cedar Creek in Brooklyn. They're doing this in the 1980s, 10 to 20 years before the fields were actually found and developed. And I'm going to show you in the red box there some of the Shell seismic data that they shot. Next slide, please. So this is an example of Shell seismic data. This is 1983. Very expensive data. They brought in a company crew, a Shell seismic crew. They had that crew operating down here in Conecuh County primarily for probably parts of 3 years. They shot 200 miles, 200 linear miles. This just happens to be a piece of one of their lines that goes through Brooklyn Field, the future Brooklyn Field. It wasn't there at the time they shot the line, but it was discovered after they shot the line, 25 years after they shot the line. And if Shell had been a little less risk adverse or had their priorities maybe a little different, they might have drilled a well, I don't know, right there, where the green point is. Go to the next slide. It's a little clearer, a little less fuzzy. Next slide. Oh, sorry. I guess I deleted that one. Sorry. Go back one more. Thanks. So what happens with the seismic data is when you have 65 feet of porosity, you get three peaks. The black things on this are peaks, and the areas in between are troughs. But the signature of 65 feet of porosity, which is enough porosity to make a 1 million barrel well, that's a really nice well, is 3 of these peaks. When you don't have 65 feet of porosity, when you have 0 feet, you get 2 peaks. And if you come up here a little closer, you can see that in this area there's 1, 2, and it's not quite black except for right in here. There's a 3rd peak, and there's a 3rd peak right in here. And these are the areas of the thickest pay zone. Go forward one. This is 70 plus feet of pay in western Brooklyn. This is 50 plus feet of pay in West Brooklyn. And there are wells in there that will make 1.5 million barrels, individual wells. And Shell shot the data. Probably I'm not any smarter than their geophysicists. They probably made the same interpretation I did, but they didn't follow through. Next. Okay, so the majors, for whatever reason, lack of success, changing priorities, what have you, leave, and there are a whole bunch of independents that come in, and what happens coincident with, I call it the rise of the independents, is 2D seismic data improves significantly. We get better instruments in the field. We get more powerful computers that can process and handle more data. So all of a sudden, the quality of the data improves significantly. So you can see things on seismic data in the late 80s with 2D data that you couldn't see in the early 80s and certainly the late 70s. And this allows smaller independents who are willing to chase smaller opportunities to be very successful. And I mean very successful. So we'll take a look at a couple of these things. The one thing I want to point out is during this period of time in the with the majors and the smaller fields they found, and then the fields that the independents are going to find, they were looking for bumps. They were looking for anticlines, the anticlinal theory that oil is going to migrate up to the highest point and get trapped at the highest point. So they were looking for high spots. And they could see these high spots on 2D data, and once 3D data began to be shot out here, you could really see not only the large bumps, but even the smaller bumps. The second thing is they were looking for dolomitized smackover. When you dolomitize a limestone, you improve the porosity and permeability. So you can make a rock that might be a 10% porosity and 50 millidarcy rock into a 10% porosity and maybe 100 millidarcy rock. So instead of flowing 100 barrels a day, it might flow 500 barrels a day. So they were looking for this dolomite. And the other thing they were looking for is the thick Buckner. The thick Buckner is the formation that overlies the smackover. Whenever you have an oil field or an oil reservoir, you have to have a seal. Otherwise, the oil just keeps on going because oil is less dense than water, right? It'll go all the way to the surface. It'll evaporate into the atmosphere if you don't catch it with a seal. So the Buckner anhydrite was the seal. So they needed all three of these things. This was the criteria for successful prospects for new oil fields, and they were wildly successful. One thing about Brooklyn and Little Cedar Creek is they don't obey any of these rules of thumb. They're going to turn out to be limestone, they're going to turn out to be stratigraphic traps, and there's no Buckner. Next slide. All right, this is Appleton. This is just an example of the bump fields. This was found by Texaco. Wasn't big enough for Texaco to hang around, but it's still 5 million barrels, and it's a really nice field. Next slide. All right, so the bump play basically develops right in here. Here's Barnett, by the way, where we just, despite all the maturity and all the wells, we just drilled a nice well right in here. So this is where the bump fields were really found, originally by the majors and then later by the independents. By the early to mid 80s, there was a secondary bump field that was found out here in Covington County. Smacko was involved in it. Some other companies were involved in developing the secondary bump field. So you had two bump fields on either side of the Conecuh embayment, this low area in between. And nobody wants to go drill the low because I just told you that the oil's in the highs, right? So nobody wants to go drill the low. So they were drilling the highs over here, and ignoring the low in between, at least for a while. Next slide. All right, so comes to the late 1980s, and there's a company called PEOC, Pacific Enterprises. And PEOC, you had the secondary bump play over here, you had the original bump play over there. PEOC comes in between, and they say, we're going to go find some bumps in between. No problem. And they shoot a ton of 2D seismic data. And they find very, very few bumps, which is actually what you'd expect. The bumps are over here, and the bumps are over there. They're not in between. But nevertheless, the data got shot. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, this is the future location of Brooklyn Field right up here. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right. Okay, they found one bump. That one bump is right here. PEOC gets sold to Hunt Oil Company. Early 1990s, gets sold to Hunt Oil Company. Hunt Oil Company inherits the PEOC seismic data, they inherit the PEOC prospects, and they go, Well, they say, we'll give it one shot. So they come in here and they say, okay, we're going to drill right here. This is the Hunt #1 CCLT 30-1 well. This is the official discovery of Little Cedar Creek Field. This is the well that started it all. 1994, and it's kind of a crappy little well. In fact, it's not even worth offsetting. So Hunt says, oh, we got to find something bigger. This is just not going to cut it. So they say, okay, we think there might be a big stratigraphic trap associated with the pinch out of the Smackover. The Smackover was deposited, and at the shoreline, it goes to 0 thickness. So it's like 90 feet thick in the Hunt well, and it goes to 0 feet thickness up here. So where it pinches out, where the reservoir ends, that's where the oil field's going to be. So this is just part of a bigger oil field. So we're going to drill a well here, and they drill a well up here, looking for that bigger oil field, and they don't find it. Both dry holes. They continue to pump this well, 1994 until 2000. And as some of you in the room know, when you have an isolated well, all the costs are associated with that one well, and that revenue from that one well has to make those costs worthwhile doing. And at some point, particularly when oil prices decrease, it becomes economic, and you sort of say, why do we still have that well? Just get rid of it. And next slide, please. Oh, this is the Hunt well. It's got the same pay zones that I showed you earlier in the LL&E well. History has a way of sort of repeating. The question is, who's going to take advantage of it? Keep going. All right, so this is the Hunt Discovery well. It starts off 1994. This is the test. It's basically producing 30 or 40 barrels a day. It gets up to 50 barrels a day. And by early 2000, it's back in the 40 barrel a day range. And it's just a single well. They're in Dallas. This is in Alabama. It's a long ways away. You know, we gotta cut our losses. One thing to point out about this thing, it produces not only oil, which is the green curve, it also produces a little bit of gas and next to no water. If there was water production, there'd be a blue curve on here. There's next to no blue on this curve. No water production. All the other bump fields, both in the major bump field area as well as the eastern bump field, they all produce water. This one does not produce water. There's something to that. Next slide. Thank you. They put it in an auction in 2000. We're going to get rid of it. Auction. So back in 2000, there was a company in Houston called Oil and Gas Clearinghouse, and they ran auctions for people wanting to dispose of stuff. These were basically in-person auctions. Later they became online auctions when the internet got big enough to do that. But this was back in the day when people actually went into a room and raised their hand and made bids and all that kind of stuff. So here's that same production curve. It's displayed on log curves, so it looks a little different. But here's the gas production, here's the oil production. Again, no water production. So, you know, if you're evaluating this thing, and this is actually the prospect brochure, had a bunch of other trash in it besides the Hunt well, you sort of say, well, you know, in the 6 years, how come somebody didn't go lease around the Hunt well and drill an offset? You know, just to see if, you know, maybe the next 160-acre location might be better than the Hunt well. I have no idea, but they didn't. And then there's a question about who knows what might have happened if somebody else had went, oh, well, of course, I could have won that auction. I probably had enough money. It went for $300,000, roughly. There's some people in this room who bid in this auction and didn't get it. Oil, by the way, was at $29 a barrel. $29 a barrel, not that high, so not too surprising that the bids weren't through the roof. But the most important thing is the flat decline curve. One well, sitting all there by itself, no decline, no water production. Okay, could there be something more around it? Next slide. All right. So here's the dismal performance of the initial well. I'm sorry, this is actually, excuse me. Yeah, this is the offset well. So company out of Shreveport, Midrock, run by Don Clark, Jim Harris, two extraordinarily successful oil finders before this. People who are good and lucky tend to be good and lucky again. They drilled an offset well to the Hunt well. And it had the same dismal performance, like, yuck! I'll get to this later, but just as a precursor as to what happened with this well, which was dead in a doornail in 2006. By 2008, this is jumping ahead a little bit, they start injecting gas into the Smackover reservoir. This is all secondary recovery. So the initial production was 101,000 barrels. The cume associated with this well is 474,000. So roughly 375,000 barrels was after they started injecting gas, not on primary production. So when you see something like this, you're tended to give up and give all this to somebody else. Next slide. Okay, so there are two wells into this. Here's the original Hunt well. Here's the well I was just describing. And this is the situation in early 2002, I think. So they've got two mediocre wells, and just like Hunt, we got to go after something bigger. So they come up with a prospect that looks a lot like the Hunt prospect. And they say, okay, we're going to drill off here to the northwest, and we're going to find a big field. So they drill that well. And they have a bunch of partners in that well because they've been to NAPE, which is this North American Prospect Expo. It's a trade fair for prospect generators in Houston. You go and you show your wares, and you sign people up who want to invest in your wells. And they get a bunch of people who sign up, and they drill this well. Next slide, please. Here's their prospect. Here are the two producing wells, the dogs. Here's a well that was drilled by Hunt, no Smackover. So here's the edge of the reservoir, and we're going to drill in between the producers and the no reservoir, no Smackover well, and we're going to find a big oil field. Maybe. Next one. Did not work. It's a dry hole. I'll get to why it was a dry hole. Well, the reason why it was a dry hole is because the rock was tight as tombstone and had absolutely no oil and gas in it whatsoever. Most discouraging well I think I've seen in all of southwest Alabama, actually. Nevertheless, they were persistent. They did not give up. They're going to go back to NAPE. They're going to go back to NAPE the next year, and a guy in Jackson, Mississippi, named Dudley Hughes, who some of you probably have heard of and know, unfortunately he's passed away about 10 years ago. He goes up and he says, you know, I think you guys are on the right track. You just haven't quite figured it out yet. I'll take 12.5% of your deal. At NAPE, just across the table, very informal negotiation. Dudley Hughes takes a significant chunk. By the way, all the investors who invested in that dry hole off to the northwest are bailing. So while everybody else is running for the exits, Dudley Hughes is coming into the building. Next slide. All right, so this is what happened. They had the down dip wells. Time to go?
No.
Okay, all right. Just let me know. Just get up and leave. So they had this down dip well right here, and they had production in this zone. They had shows in this zone, and this is the well that they drilled that was up there. It's just tighter than a tank, tighter than a tombstone. There's actually a transition from porous rock to non-porous rock, from porous rock to non-porous rock, and this well had Smackover before you get to the zero edge of the Smackover. So the zero edge of the Smackover is not the trap, it's some ill-defined transition from porous to non-porous Smackover. That's the trap. And that's what this I was going to say God for a second, well told everybody. Actually, it told everybody who was paying attention. This guy was paying attention. Steve Kraft. I'll get to his story in just a second. Next slide. All right, a little bit more on Dudley Hughes. Map courtesy of Tom McMillan. So, in 2001, they drilled these 2 wells. These are the 2 dog producers. They said, we got to find something bigger. This was the edge of the Smackover Reservoir, the pinch out, the shoreline, whatever you want to call it. And they drilled this dry hole. Everybody headed for the exits except for Dudley Hughes, who came in to the building. The reason why he came into the building is this map. Sorry about all the... basically, the upshot of this map is instead of going to the northwest, he said, you need to go to the east-northeast. This way is where you want to go. This way is where the oil field is, not that way. Next slide. So no more seismic. We're going to just do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to make geologic maps, and we're going to allow those geologic maps to drill 1 well at a time, incorporate the results of that most recent well, and then drill the next well, and drill the next well, and drill the next well. No fancy stuff. Thank you very much. So they do. They go, these are the 2 dogs. They drill this well. This well's a little bit better. Again, that's the old dry hole. Steve Kraft is watching this stuff. Smart geologist out of Jackson, Mississippi. And he's figured out that, again, it's not the zero edge of the Smackover up here. It's a facies change, that's what geologists call it, a change from porous to non-porous rock, much closer than people thought. Next slide. So here's the up-dip limit of Smackover. Here's that dry hole I keep talking about. The 2 original producers are these 2 wells right here. Midrock starts drilling to the east-northeast and is very successful. They're completing their wells in the upper Smackover oolite zone. The lower Smackover is still wet. By the way, go back a couple of slides. I want to point out something where people play games with the state of Alabama. Go back one more. Okay, one more. One more. Okay, go forward. Thank you. Thank you. Right, this one. So remember I told you that this was a bump that had been mapped on POX seismic data that Hunt had drilled. In fact, the Hunt well is that well right there, the 30-1 well. Well, Midrock gets the property in the auction and proceeds to start drilling wells. For about 3 or 4 years, they tell the state of Alabama it's a bump because the state of Alabama has a mindset that all accumulations in southwest Alabama are bumps. So the way you get regulatory approval is you tell them what they're expecting to hear. It's a bump. So they drill well 2, well 3, well 4, it's still a bump. Well 5, well 6, go ahead and forward. They get to this extent and they go, oh shit, sorry, it's not a bump. It's a stratigraphic trap. There's no structure. There's no bump. There's no closure. It's a stratigraphic trap controlled by a transition from porous rocks to non-porous rocks. All in the upper Smackover oolite. The upper zone only is productive. Go ahead. All right. Until they drill the 22-2 Pew well. The 22-2 Pew well changes everything. It changed everything at 3 o'clock in the morning on a weekday when Robin Smith is sitting in the office waiting for the log to come over from the Pew location. The log comes over, comes spitting out of the fax machine on a continuous feed. He's looking at it. Not only is the upper Smackover, which is this green filled, the lower Smackover, which has been this blue wet zone, all of a sudden is full of oil. So now they have two pays, an upper pay and this gorgeous porous permeable reef that's full of oil in the lower Smackover. 3 o'clock in the morning, he's all alone in the office. There's nobody to celebrate with. The way he tells you, he waits until 8 o'clock in the morning. Jim Harris comes into the office and says, Jim, guess what? The whole thing is full of oil. So that's the well that establishes the pay in the lower Smackover Reef. And this field's going to go on for 15 miles, and the reef is full of oil from this point 15 miles to the northeast. Next slide. So they just keep on drilling. One well at a time. It's amazing, their success rate. They drilled between, go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, between November 2003, take this from somebody who's drilled a bunch of dry holes. This is amazing. From November 2003 to November 2007, 4 years, they drilled one well a month, 48 wells, no dry holes. 48 wells in a row, no dry holes. That is hard to do. I couldn't do it. The streak was only broken because they did, I believe his name is Grady Rawls.
Grady Rawls.
Thank you, appreciate it. Grady Rawls has a home out here, and he wanted a well drilled on his property. So as a favor to Mr. Rawls, Midrock went down and drilled a well on Mr. Rawls' property. Unfortunately, it was a dry hole. Not only was it a dry hole, it broke the streak. But they had to go a mile and a half. They broke their one well at a time mantra and went and drilled this well and broke the streak. In the meantime, by the way, there are about 20 wells into this field. Oil prices are going up. And Dudley Hughes, who's now 39% of the Midrock Group, is cashing checks reported to be $2 million a month. Good work if you can get it. Next slide. Yeah, Hugh is right. All right, I talked about Mr. Kraft. This is Mr. Kraft's prospect map, redrafted by me. This is the control that existed roughly in 2003 or thereabouts. These were the two stinking wells. This was the first well in the right direction after Dudley Hughes got everybody's attention. The rest of these wells are well controlled that were drilled by other people. These are the two Hunt dry holes that were drilled to the north. And there's nothing out here, zippo, except for the old PEOC seismic data. So Kraft gets a hold of the old PEOC seismic data, and what he thinks is this is the pinch out or the edge of the Smackover based on seismic data. And he says, okay, if that's the edge of the Smackover, then the change from porous to non-porous Smackover, he's going to say is about right here. And the reason why that's important is because the Midrock drilling was basically pretty much going due east. And Kraft said, I think it's going to go more to the northeast. It doesn't look like much of a change in direction, but he was able to lease 9,500 acres, almost 10,000 acres, up here. At the same time, Midrock was focusing on acreage down here because they thought it was going to go this way, and Kraft had a different idea that it might go that way. Next slide. So let's see who's right. Oh, Steve Kraft was right. It went to the northeast. This is that 15-mile reef headed like a freight train to the northeast. So Mr. Kraft turns out to be correct. These are fabulous wells. They probably average 500,000 barrels. The best ones are about 900,000. And it's good to be right. Next slide. So Midrock not only thought it was going to go east-west, they actually came out here and leased approximately 16,000 acres in late 2004 of CCLT land. Again, if I'd looked at their progress, I would have thought it was going to go this way too. Steve Kraft again thought it was going to go this way, and in fact did go that way. We'll see that this block of acreage, even though it struck out for Little Cedar Creek becomes very important 4 years later when Brooklyn comes into play. Next slide. All right, so initial 2 stinking wells drilled by Hunt and Midrock. Here's the Little Cedar Creek following Steve Kraft. So this was all developed by about 2009 or so. And this is interpreted to be a shoreline, stratigraphic trap associated with the pinch out, associated with the shoreline. So everybody fans out all over southwest Alabama trying to find the next shoreline. Everywhere from the Mississippi line over near Choctaw County, all the way through what's called the Manila Embayment, which would be Clark County, and all the way down into the Panhandle of Florida. Everybody, geologists just love exploration, and there was a lot of it. And a whole bunch of dry holes got drilled trying to find another Little Cedar Creek. What's amazing is the next shoreline wasn't a county over, or 2 counties over, or 3 counties over. It was right next door. In fact, it's right next door. Okay, next slide. All right. It was right next door, but it was really hard to find. This is my little diagram for how hard it was to find Brooklyn Field. In fact, after Little Cedar Creek kind of started developing in 2002, 2003, it took another 7 years from 2002, 2003 until 2009 to find Brooklyn, which was right next door. I mean, geologists got advanced degrees, but who'd know it? All right, next one. All right, so this is a little story about Sklar, and they're looking for Brooklyn. This is a map that's about 2004. These are the original 2 Hunt and the 2 Stinker wells. Here's Little Cedar Creek getting developed to the northeast. It's going to go that direction, and then it's going to head up towards Kraft's position. And this is an example of Sklar, who's one of the operators and developers of Little Cedar Creek. In fact, they got into the play because they took the Steve Kraft position. So Steve went and leased 10,000 acres. And the story with Steve Kraft and Sklar, Steve starts to think that it's time to shop the deal. He's leased enough acres, spent enough money. And he's goes to Sklar's office in Shreveport, Louisiana. And he shows him the deal, shows him the geology, shows him the lease block that he has up here, the 9,500 acres. And Sklar is so taken that the exploration manager, a guy named Corey Ezel, who unfortunately has passed away, issues an order in the office not to let Steve Kraft leave the building until Howard Sklar has come down and seen the deal. Howard Sklar comes down and sees the deal, they do the deal, and Sklar is now in Little Cedar Creek, and they become part of Brooklyn as well. But in the meantime, before Brooklyn gets found, they're looking for it. And this is an example of exploration prospect map where they had a shoreline up here, and the Sklar guys thought, well, maybe there's a shoreline down here. And they drill about 4 wells, and they drill one right up here called the Logan well. And it's a 20 barrel a day well. If those other wells were stinkers, these are stinkers with a capital S, this well. And it's so bad that normally when you find oil and gas production, you go to the state and you apply for a field designation, J field. Another company was out here, I call it the Ensight Group. Again, they were out of Shreveport. They had leased a ton of land that is referred to as the Andalusia Minerals Block. Andalusia Minerals Block is over here in far southeastern Conecuh County, where that little boot heel is on Conecuh County. And they had drilled a couple wells over here on that lease block, and they were absolutely awful wells. Just shale, no carbonate, no porosity, no oil, no nothing. And they were sort of on their last legs, and before their leases started to expire, they approached Midrock, where they had some common acreage over here on the west end of their block, back towards the production. This is Little Cedar Creek as it was developed at the time. They approached Midrock and said, maybe we could form what we call a pooled unit. We'll put our acreage together and we'll drill a couple of wells and see what happens. And they do that, and one of those wells is the Jackson well. This is the Logan well down here. This is the Jackson well, Midrock Jackson well, and that actually turns out to be an 80 barrel a day well. Again, sort of a stinker with a small s. And there's about 3 miles in between them, and people are beginning to pay attention. So let's see what happens next. Thank you. So this is Brooklyn Field today. The dashed black outline is the area of the field. This is the location of the Logan well, the stinker with the capital S, the one that didn't even become a field designation. This is the location of the Jackson and Lewis wells. These are the guys that had the big yellow acreage block off here at Andalusia Minerals. On the far western end, they drilled these 2 wells with Midrock and found, unofficially, Brooklyn Field. The reason why it's not the discovery for Brooklyn Field was because there was no Brooklyn Field at that time. And they figured, shucks, we got to go for a field designation. We'll just put them in Little Cedar Creek because it's easier. It's an existing field. We'll just bring Little Cedar Creek down, put these wells in it, and we'll be done. Administrative task, check. So that's not the discovery because it wasn't named the discovery. That's not the discovery because it was put in a different field. Somewhere along the same time, a company called Columbia. Only well they ever drilled in Little Cedar Creek or Brooklyn, drills the Nick Ross well. Fabulous well. The upper reservoir is in Little Cedar Creek. The lower reservoir is in Brooklyn. Guess what? It's right on the boundary between the 2 fields. No big surprise. But because they couldn't figure out whether it was in Brooklyn or Little Cedar Creek, it didn't get a field designation. It remained until this well, which is the Fletcher #1 Amos well, the famous Amos well. This well gets drilled in late 2009, is completed in early 2010, comes on at 600 barrels a day, and the rest is history. Yep. Next slide. That was hard to find, right? They found it, they didn't even call it Brooklyn Field. 0 for 3, 1 for 4. All right, so here's Brooklyn down here. Do I have the Amos well on here? Yeah, the Amos well is right here. The Jackson and Lewis wells are over here. The Logan well is down here. And let's see. Oh yeah. I should have pointed this out on the one. That CCLT block, that 16,000 acres, where it missed Little Cedar Creek back in 2004, it becomes the dominant acreage block in East Brooklyn. So they missed out on this one, but they caught up when East Brooklyn expanded to the east, and all of that acreage basically became part of Brooklyn Field after having missed out in becoming Little Cedar Creek Field. Next slide. All right, a couple of last comments. They refer more to today. Fields all developed, and because these fields are what's called pressure depletion fields or solution gas drive fields, so the energy is relatively weak compared to, say, a water drive field. Water drive, basically you produce a barrel of oil and a barrel of water replaces it. So you have water continually coming up, helping the oil into the well bars, so you have a higher recovery factor than if you just have little bubbles of gas pushing the oil to the well bores. It's a weaker drive system. So your primary recovery factor on a solution gas drive reservoir, which we have here in Brooklyn and Little Cedar Creek, is on the order of 15, 18, if you're lucky, 20% of the oil in place. Whereas a water drive, it might be 40 or 45%. But the good news is they work like crazy when you inject water. You start injecting water, which is known as a water flood, these solution gas drive reservoirs respond beautifully. I'm just going to talk to you about West Brooklyn, which is this well right here. This is a 60-foot pay section in West Brooklyn. It's called Zone 4. This well and the well next to it, somebody probably knows, this is the Johnson Trust. The well next to it is the, anybody help me out here?
Next to it with the
Overby. Well done. Overby and the Johnson Trust, right next door to each other in West Brooklyn. Adjacent 160-acre tracts. Same pay section. Both wells in 2000 and, I'll show you the curve in just a second. They were completed in 2011, 2000. This one was completed in 2012. Both wells, after several years on production, were making about 100 barrels a day. They took a 100-barrel-a-day well and converted it to an injector, this well right here. And the idea was they were going to inject water into this well and push oil into the adjacent well. Good idea in theory. Let's see how it worked. Next slide. Oh, go back one more slide. Sorry, the answer's on that slide. So, at the time they started injecting, this well was making 100 barrels a day. As recently as the end of 2024, it was making almost 600 barrels a day. After primary production, it had made 713,000 barrels. It has now made 1.4 million barrels. It is making almost 600 barrels a day. All due to injecting water. They didn't have to drill any more wells. All they did was convert one well into an injector and kept producing from the adjacent well. 700,000 barrels additional and counting at the pace of 600 barrels a day. Next slide. So everything's developed except for a late push to the southeast, a company called Fletcher. This is now all operated by Pruitt. Fletcher establishes an acreage position down here and drills what's called Southeast Brooklyn, and that's really the last major addition to the field. Next slide. Oh, and this was the location of that, more specifically, that 16,000 acre block. They missed it with Little Cedar Creek, but Brooklyn ran right into it. I'd rather be lucky than right. Next slide. Okay, so this is the location of those two wells. That's the injector, that's the producer. That's the one that's making 600 barrels a day due to water injection into the adjacent well. This is the trend to the southeast. There was a little controversy in terms of whether Brooklyn would follow Little Cedar Creek, and for a long time, people were leasing out here and drilling out here, and it didn't work. It turned and went to the southeast, and I'll show you why. Next slide. So this is an ISOPAC map that was favored by none other than Dudley Hughes. Dudley Hughes was the guy that said it's going to go to the northeast, not to the northwest. And it follows the contours of the thickness of the Smackover almost perfectly. Here's the outline of the field in dashed black, and it follows that green contour almost perfectly. It's great when geology works. Brooklyn does the same thing, and instead of going to the northeast, where you'd have to cross across these contours, it follows the contours and goes to the southeast. Ta-da! That's my advertisement for hiring a geologist. Next one. All right. This has to do with unitization. I think I've got a graph in here that will show this a little bit better. Next slide. This is what I talked about before. Primary production stunk. They started injecting gas and it took off like a house of fire. Literally, house of fire. Next. All right. Yeah, this is the units that exist today for water floods in Brooklyn Field. There are 4 of them. Northeast Brooklyn, Northwest Brooklyn, Southwest Brooklyn, and Southeast Brooklyn. These 2 are sort of so-so in terms of performance versus predicted performance, actual versus predicted. This one has outperformed the prediction. And this one is where the Johnson and the Overby wells are, over here in West Brooklyn. This one's insane. Next. Right. Major pay zones in Brooklyn are Zone 4. This is the West Brooklyn pay zone. This is the Northeast Brooklyn pay zone, Zone 1. Next one. I love this graph. All right, so this is the Overby well. This was the start of the well production. This is primary recovery, 400 barrels a day. Really nice well on primary. And they started injection right here. And this is the response to injection. That's just putting water in. No additional drilling, just injecting water into the adjacent well. This is the response on a well 2,000 feet away. Whew. Wow.
Where are they getting the water to inject?
Tuscaloosa. So there's a saltwater sand at about 5,000 feet. So they're pumping water out of that saltwater sand at 5,000 feet and injecting it into the offset well to this well, and they're seeing the response in the oil production in this well.
Is production based strictly on porosity?
Yes. Fractures aren't really, you don't have to frack these wells. They're just natural production. It's just Mother Nature's production due to depth of burial. So the production down here is about 5,000 or 6,000 pounds, and you can deplete that down to maybe 1,000, 1,500 pounds, and you recover a bunch of oil in the process. Next slide. All right. So when they put together the water flood to get it approved by the state of Alabama, they have to put in a business case for the water flood to justify it. So this is the business case. And this is Northwest Brooklyn. So this is when the wells in Northwest Brooklyn went on production. They would reach a maximum on their primary and then start to decline. And if you projected that decline out to basically today, and you didn't do a water flood, you didn't inject water, you just produced the primary production, from Northwest Brooklyn, the production today would be 6,000 barrels a month. That's that point right there. Just projecting that data out to today. When they did the water flood business case, they were predicting 38,000 barrels a month. Significant improvement over if they didn't do it, right? The actual is 70,000. Almost twice what they had predicted. That is good engineering. Next slide. And land work and geology, but really good engineering. This is Little Cedar Creek. This is what would have happened if you left it on primary. This is primarily the effect of that gas injection. Significant difference. This would have been basically done. The field would have been done in 2021 if you hadn't injected the gas. Instead, you're producing almost 40,000 barrels a month. Next slide.
Same question, where do they get the gas?
From the wells.
From the wells?
From the wells. So they're cycling the gas. Yes, exactly. Next slide. And this is the same plot for Brooklyn, the whole field now. If you had just produced it on primary, it would go out in about 2026. Next year, you'd be done. But instead, because you're having some really good success with your water floods, you're producing, 125,000 barrels a month. And that's going to go on forever. Wow. It will go on for my life. And I'm not even much of it. So I'm excited. And I'm not even much of
How long
it.
is it gonna last?
You could put a ruler on that as well as I could. What do you think?
You'll retire out there.
There's your scale. 15 years? It partly depends on operating cost. Seriously, that's usually what does the stuff in. The production doesn't go to zero. It goes to economic limit. So, if economic limit's down here, it's going to go for 20 years. If economic limit is up here, op cost, it might go for 5 more years. And that's why at the end of life of fields, people put so much emphasis on operating costs. Is because they've kind of done everything they can with the wellbores.
I just want to add something.
Sure.
On the Johnson
Knock
Trust,
yourself out.
We were just talking
Yes,
about
sir.
Johnson Trust, the bin
Yes.
injector.
Yes, sir.
It still takes all of its water on a vacuum. We don't even have to pump it.
Amazing. That's because it's that good a reservoir.
That's right.
It falls into the well.
So Travis over there is one of the guys that pumps all those wells in Brooklyn.
He should give this talk next.
Manages them.
He can give the talk the next time. All right, next slide. All right, so this is my woulda, coulda, shoulda slide. So way back in the beginning, LL&E drilled that well after they were involved in the discovery of J. 5 miles directly down dip. They had oil shows, and they did nothing. They just walked away. This is a dry hole. See ya. And the thing just sat there for 24 more years. In the mid-1980s, Shell had that seismic crew. They parked that company crew, shot this gorgeous data, including a couple of seismic lines that went right across the Johnson Trust and the Overby well. You can see those big, thick porosity zones on that seismic data, and they didn't do squat. 1994, Hunt moves in here, drills, obviously, the discovery for Little Cedar Creek, the well that starts it all, and it sits there as a one-well field for 6 years, and what do? Put it in an auction and sell it. 1995, I didn't talk about this, but there was a company called Malatex. Malatex drilled 2 very significant wells, one of which is 1,500 feet away from the eastern side of Brooklyn Field, the Malatex Johnson 12-4 well. Just missed it. Just missed it. 2010, so this is after Little Cedar Creek was found, before Brooklyn was found. Remember, they're right next door to each other. Midrock and Scar were looking for these additional shorelines all over the Conecuh Embayment, all over southwest Louisiana. Nobody really appreciated the fact that the next big field was right next door, right there. One of the things about this is that they were exploring with the drill bit, not with seismic data. If they'd shot seismic data, they might have seen what Shell saw 20 years earlier with 3D data and maybe found that field 5 years earlier. And then I didn't go into this a lot, but those water flood units up in Little Cedar Creek, 2, 3, and 4 on the northeast end, they stink. And there's a bunch of reasons that have been given, some geologic, some engineering, but the principal reason that people give is timing. They waited too long.
Way too long. I've heard that many times.
Before injecting. And if you allow the pressure to get too low, it takes too much water to build it back up to move the oil. Whereas in Brooklyn, they got after it a lot quicker, and they had better rock. Last question about, are these things unique? Are they one of a kind? Because they're so big, if you plot these up on a cumulative percent curve, they're up there at the 1-2% of the total population. And I would say, before November, I would say, yep, they were unique. And after we made a nice discovery over in Barnett Crossroads, I'd say, maybe not. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.